Today's date is December 13th, 2017, and I'm Susan Kahlo. I'm conducting the interview here at the Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park as part of our oral history project to help with educating students and other people. And I'm interviewing today James Mathis, who is with the U.S. Marine, Corporal E4. But I will get you to please, I'll start by asking you just to identify yourself and your rank, where you were, and tell me where you physically were when you decided, what made you join the Marines?
Okay, I go by Jim. I'm Jim Mathis. I was a corporal in the Marine Corps. Actually, I had to make corporal twice because when I joined, the rank of corporal was enlisted 3. And during that time, they changed, all the branches of the service changed their rank structure so that they would all have 8 enlisted grades.
Okay, so how old were you at the time? What year? Do you remember what year this was?
By the time I was corporal, I was probably about 19, which would be 1958. And so they had an E3, which became a lance corporal, but I was already a corporal. A lance corporal was not a non-commissioned officer, and a corporal was. So until I made E4 and made corporal a second time, they called me an acting corporal.
Okay.
So it got a little crazy. As to when I decided to join the Marine Corps, well, first of all, I was born in 1939, and I grew up during World War II. Mm-hmm. And my early childhood was during World War II, and the military was highly respected. Unlike today, where people often don't think a lot of the military. So I grew up with that in mind. I mean, I always thought that the Navy and the Marines and the Army and the Air Force actually wasn't even an Air Force then. They called it the Army Air Corps. It was part of the Army. But anyway, we're people to look up to because they were fighting our war. And I guess I kind of liked the Navy and thought I was going to join the Navy. And I met a Navy chaplain on my newspaper route, and he took me over to the Anacostia Naval Air Station, and I got to eat Navy chow, and they bought me a sailor hat, and so I more or less thought I was going to go in the Navy. And about my sophomore, junior year in high school, I read a book by Leon Uris. It was called Battle Cry. And it was about the Marines in World War II. And it kind of changed my mind as to what I wanted to do. Now, I didn't have the money to go to college, and the draft was still active then. So, people would say that, well, you might as well go on in the service and get it over with, and then you can get a job when you get out. Not necessarily for the training in the service, but to get that behind you so that people would give you a job and not have you get drafted out from under them. So I joined the Marine Corps shortly after, I'd say within a month after graduating from high school. I went through basic training, or as they call it, boot camp, at Parris Island, South Carolina, which wasn't very bright because I went there in July, and it is pretty hot and humid there. I should have waited until the fall or something. But, and after that...
Well, how was your experience in boot camp? Was it what you expected, or what was...
It was... Right before that, there had been an incident at Parris Island where a drill instructor had taken a bunch of recruits on a night march, and they crossed a creek. It's called Ribbon Creek, and it was deeper than a creek, and a number of these recruits drowned. And so there was all this talk about how they're looking at Parris Island and then, going to get that under control, if that was unusual, that the guy shouldn't have done that. So it was, on the surface, what they told the public, well, it's changed. It hadn't changed. My senior drill instructor, who liked me, at least I felt he did, and I actually saw him after I got out into the Marine Corps. I looked him up, and he was near where I was stationed on Okinawa, and went over and had a beer with him. But anyway, first day there, or second day, we were sending our civilian clothes home. And they had issued us military clothes and cut our hair off. And he said, if your trousers won't fit in your overnight bag, wrap the trousers around the outside and hook them with your belt, and then we'll wrap them in brown paper and send us your civilian clothes home. Well, I didn't have the belt, so I kind of put my hand up, and he walked over, and he said, what do you want? And what I wanted was to request permission to speak to the drill instructor, but I didn't know that. And I said, sir, I don't have and that's about all I got out. He had me by the throat. And he's saying, when do you ever talk to the drill instructor without asking permission? And I go, never.
Did they tell you that that's what you're supposed to do, or that's how you learned?
I was 18 years old, and everything was changing so quickly. I mean,
that must have been.
I took a train down there, never been on a train ride, and then they put us on a bus and took us out to Parris Island.
Did that scare you?
It got my attention, and he never touched me again after that. And I've seen him hit, not in the face, but a little punch. Got your attention. You can imagine the job he's trying to do. He's got kids from all over the country, all kind of different backgrounds. Some are athletes. A lot of them were athletes. And I was only about 125, 30 pounds. And the name for a little guy is a feather merchant. That's what you did for, a living. You sold feathers because that's all you could carry. But after there, I thought, well, my training's done after Parris Island. We were there 13 weeks. And, one of the things they did there was give a strength test. They had so many push-ups you had to do, so many pull-ups. And pull-ups are harder than chin-ups. Chin-ups are this way. Pull-ups are holding the bar this way, and it's harder. And run certain distance in a certain amount of time. And there were another number of things there were calisthenics. And if you couldn't do those, there were only two reasons as far as the Marine Corps was concerned. You were either overweight or you were too weak. And so some of these poor guys that started out training with me ended up going to get stronger to the strength platoon. And the ones that were overweight went to what they called the fat man's platoon. Now the fat man they exercised most of the day and got half rations. The guys they were trying to make stronger exercised most of the day and got double rations. And there was one guy that started out with me, and we were within 2 weeks of completing our training, and I saw him with another platoon just starting the training. So that time that he was with the fat man's platoon, and he was a shadow of his former self. I mean, he had dropped some weight, and he could do the calisthenics and all that, but his training was just starting. The marching, the first aid, the shooting the rifle, the bayonet practice, all of that was just starting for him. So he ended up spending a lot more than 13 weeks at Parris Island. So anyway, I left with my platoon, and I thought our training was over. Well, that's not quite true. The first thing that every Marine does upon completing basic training is go to infantry training, no matter what your job is in the Marine Corps. Butcher, baker, candlestick maker, you're a rifleman first. So you go for a month of playing Marine. I mean, you're out in the woods, they're showing you how to throw hand grenades, they're showing you demonstrations of different equipment. You get to actually throw a hand grenade and shoot a bazooka, which nowadays they're some kind of a rocket, but then it was a bazooka. And you did 4 weeks of that training.
Was this still in Georgia?
No, this was in a place called Camp Geiger, which is in North Carolina, and it's right adjacent to where the 2nd Marine Division is located, which is Camp Lejeune at the time. Now, if you join the Marine Corps and you live west of the Mississippi, you don't go to Parris Island, you go to San Diego Recruit Depot or boot camp. And of course, the guys from the East Coast called them Hollywood Marines, but they go through the same thing. And I think they do their basic infantry training at Camp Pendleton, probably, which is where the 1st Marine Division was then located. The 3rd Marine Division was located on Okinawa with, I think, 1 brigade, which is like a reinforced regiment stationed in Hawaii. So I went to Camp Lejeune, 2nd Marine Division, the 10th Marines. Now, the 1st through the 9th Marine regiments, and they don't call them, I mean, they're regiments, that's their full correct name, but they just refer to them as the 1st Marines, the 2nd Marines. Well, the 10th, 11th, and 12th Marines are artillery regiments, and I was in the 10th. It was peacetime, but in 1958, the Christians and Muslims started shooting each other in Beirut.
Beirut in Lebanon.
Yeah, Beirut, Lebanon. And there were a lot of foreign nationals there. Beirut was called the Paris of the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful place. But they had this little civil war started. Well, back in those days, this was all new. So President Eisenhower sent some airborne troops down from Germany, and there was always a floating reinforced battalion with the 6th Fleet of Marines. The 6th Fleet has Marines floating with it. They landed. And things have changed so much from that time that when they landed on the beach, their job was to go through town and take the international airport so the foreign nationals could get out of the country. They landed on the beach, and there were women and children out there swimming. Watch out for the children.
Did you go then, is that how it was when you went?
I'll get there, it's almost there. As they went through town, and I got this firsthand from the guys that went to the airport, the two sides quit shooting at each other for fear they would hit an American. I mean, that's how different it was then in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you've got no battalion floating with the 6th Marines because they're on shore. So I went over to take their place so that they still had a battalion floating with the 6th Marines. And in a way, I got very lucky because when the thing died down, I got to stay. The original battalion went home, and I got to go. I went to Greece, Turkey, Italy, Spain, France, Crete, Sardinia, and actually Libya. That was pre-Gaddafi. And so we went around, and
you were on the
ship.
With the ship.
On a ship. It was LST 1173. The Suffolk County was a new LST. It's the thing they can run up on the beach and open the big doors.
Okay.
And it actually had some self-propelled 105 self-propelled 8-inch howitzers on it, and Amtraks, which the Marines would go ashore in. They were developed in World War II. So they were all in the inside of the ship, which is like hollow, and then we were the troops on that ship, and there were 5 ships in her little flotilla that had various components of the Marines.
So during this time, you said the conflict died down, so it was kind of a peaceful time?
Yeah.
How did you communicate with your family and friends back in the States?
Oh, geez, you wrote letters, and there were no cell phones, of course. If you got some place that there was a USO or something, you might be able to make a phone call home. I never did. You'd write letters, and they'd write to address them to you, care of the Fleet Post Office, and sooner or later they'd get to you.
Were you homesick, or how did you feel during this time? Adventure?
Yeah, adventurous. I mean, it was, now I'm getting to be 19, and I might have turned 20 when I was over there. And it was, I got to see places. Now, I actually got to do a 3-day trip to Rome, kind of as a little thing you could sign up for, and went to the Vatican, and just, went to Marseille. Now, the big ships would go into the nice ports like Nice and Cannes, and the troop ships would go into Marseille and
smaller ports.
And the smaller ports. But I was in Athens, and I was in Istanbul, and just got a little exposure to different culture. When I came home, they told me I couldn't have been home more than a month back in the States, and they said, "You're going to Okinawa." And I said, "What?" I just got back from overseas. So I went down to the first sergeant. I guess he was the battalion first sergeant. I've been a sergeant major. And his name was Red Ebert. And he had actually had a small talking part in the movie Battle Cry that they made from the book. So I knew who this guy was. But anyway, I went there, and I said, they have orders for Okinawa. I said, I just got back from overseas. He says, Med Cruise doesn't count. Oh, and I said, well, that's a 15-month tour of duty, and I only have about 13 months to do in the Marine Corps. And he picked up the telephone and called somebody, and he hung up The regiment says that as long as you have a year to do, as of the tentative sailing date, not actually when you're going to sail, but at the 10th. So they let me go home for 30 days, and I got on my first airplane ride across the country.
So how was that?
Prop.
Oh, wow.
Probably Pan Am or something with 4 props.
Mm-hmm.
And flew to Los Angeles, then San Diego, and then a bus out to Camp Pendleton.
Were you in uniform, or did you go back in civilian clothes?
Probably in civilian clothes.
Okay.
And we went to Camp Pendleton, and that was really a bummer because you weren't assigned to an organization. You're waiting for everybody to get there so you can sail for Okinawa. They didn't fly Marines. You went on a ship. So I crossed the entire Pacific there were dependents on there too. And we were down in the steerage and they were up here. And I think they had pins for their dogs and stuff up. Yeah. But we were in the steerage class, bunks about 4 high. And stopped in Japan, let us off the ship for a day or, and we went to Okinawa, and there all the people that I knew, the fellows that I knew from the 10th Marines and everything, we kind of got split up. We're still artillery, but like my best buddy there, he ended up going to 105 howitzers. I ended up in 4.2-inch mortars, and it just.
So how many? That was another question. Do you stay together as a group, make friends, and the battalion? No, when you got moved, when you got reassigned, like when you were going to go to Okinawa, were you again with other Marines that you knew, or just another group?
A few that they had sent over there, but when we got there, we all went to different organizations.
So you get dispersed again.
And now I've met people on Okinawa and I ended up in Charlie Battery, 12th Marines. Remember the 10th, 11th, and 12th are artillery. And I was in the artillery regiments called their company strength. People, batteries, not companies. And I've met people there. One fellow that I talk to on the phone a few times a year, and we email all the time, and that's been 60 years ago.
Wow.
And I was best man at his wedding, and
Nice.
we have stayed in touch. I've been out to visit him in Cali. He was from New York originally and moved to California and did quite well in the business out there, and is retired.
So he was one you were with in Okinawa?
Yeah.
What did you do for fun on the ship when you were sailing?
Played cards. We would get these paperback books. Who's got page 40? They would fall apart. They had been read so many times. And it says, who's got the pages after the 46 or whatever? And there was an author. What was his name? I just looked him up. But anyway, he wrote about a private detective named Shell Scott. And Richard Prather was the author. I read so many of those books because I spent going across the Pacific, but I also spent 7 months on ship in the Mediterranean. They would get us up on deck and do calisthenics, and we would constantly be doing maintenance of equipment up there, getting the salt spray off of our Jeeps that were on the deck or something. That was in the Mediterranean. Going over to Okinawa, you didn't have anything much to do. And
How was the food? You remember?
okay, it was all right. For some people, it was probably the best food they ever had in their life. get a lot of poor folks. One of the things that the Marine Corps serves were breakfasts, which the troops call SOS. I don't know if I can say this on
You can say anything. What's the SOS?
Shit on a shingle.
Okay.
And it's cream chip beef on toast, okay, for breakfast. Except the Marine Corps didn't use real chip beef. The only time I ever got real chip beef was in the Mediterranean on that Navy ship. They had real chip beef on toast, which is good. You know, I liked it. But the Marine Corps uses hamburger. And growing up, I grew up, was kind of like in a foster home for about 11 years. And the lady times were tough. And she used to make something called hamburger gravy, where she would take hamburger and make a white sauce. And it's real easy to make. And she would serve it for dinner. We didn't put it on toast, but we'd have it like with your potatoes or something. So all of these people that I went to boot camp with, they're looking at this stuff. It's like, what in the world is this? Well, to me, it was like home. Hey, I like this. Anyway, so we get to Okinawa, and it's not what I expect. I think Okinawa is going to look like Hawaii. And it does have palm trees, but it has conifers, it has a lot of pine, and it actually has some kind of mountainous, well, Hawaii does too, mountainous territory. But it has seasons there. I mean, it gets chilly, it gets cold. I don't think I ever saw snow. But the reason, it's very close to Japan. It's only like 360 miles from Tokyo. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty close. And during World War II, they really wanted that island so that they could bomb and, get back safely. So that was a very, I read a book about that Battle of Okinawa, and I think it was called The Final Storm or something. It was very, 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 a lot of people killed.
What was the sentiment towards the Americans there? Was it different than in the Mediterranean or Lebanon?
I never had, at that point in the world, World War II hadn't been over that long, and Korea had ended, and I can't remember ever having anybody be nasty to me. And the Okinawan economy was just totally, I mean, there were 2 Marine bases, a Navy base, 2 Air Force bases, so their economy was dependent on these Americans buying goods and services. You want a haircut, you go into town, and it was a service oriented, something I was going to think about. It's gone. It'll come back.
You said it wasn't what you expected.
Yeah, in that
Hawaii.
it had seasons. Mm-hmm. Tokyo is on the same parallel as Boston. And like Mount Fujiyama, where we spent a month or 2 playing Marine out in the boonies, is north of Tokyo. So it was cold. Mm-hmm. And we were living in, large tents with a little gas heater kind of thing. Actually, it was probably diesel fuel. That the diesel can sat outside on a box, and it had a hose that ran in under the edge of the tent and provided some heat. But when you would wake up, everybody there we had cots. We didn't have regular beds or bunks. And everybody slept in their sleeping bag. And these were heavy-duty sleeping bags. You'd wake up and look. And the ceiling inside of these big tents, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 people to a tent, they were big tents, it would be white. Your breath is rising, and when it would hit that canvas, it would freeze.
Oh.
Because that's how cold it was. So Okinawa wasn't exactly what I had pictured it as being. But in the summer, it was hot and muggy and humid. Beautiful beaches.
So it was more of a peaceful time, so it was not
Yeah,
difficult?
we weren't going to, just before I got out of the Marine Corps, when I got discharged, the Vietnam, Laos, that area was really starting to.
So about what year was this? What year?
This would be like 1960. And there was a typhoon coming, which was like a hurricane. And if it hit Okinawa and the Marines couldn't get out of there, the 3rd Marine Division couldn't get out because of the storm, and something happened, and then it was Laos they were worried about for some reason. I wasn't real up on that, but it was above my rank. But they packed the entire division up, and we went to sea to run around the tornado or the typhoon, so that it really hit Okinawa hard, and we came back, there were trees down and everything. But if something had happened in Laos, we'd been almost there, and we wouldn't have been trapped in. So that's kind of the way the thinking was going. And right after I got discharged, Vietnam started kind of cooking. I may have seen one of the first advisors wounded on crutches in Washington, D.C., because I'd read in the paper about that one of the advisors, because that's all we had there.
So you did not want to, you had already made the decision you weren't going to stay in longer than your...
I probably would have. I liked the Marine Corps. I like the structure. I'm just, I'm kind of anal retentive. I like things a certain way, and that's the Marine Corps way of doing things. But mainly it was peer pressure. A lot of the other guys that were my friends were talking about, they had plans. They were going back and get their Chevy and drive to the levee and go to college, and I didn't even know why people went to college until I said, how come they're an officer? Oh, well, they went to college. Oh,
That just wasn't, you weren't exposed to that.
No, it wasn't part of my, I wouldn't say I was dirt poor, but I was middle class, maybe lower middle class. So I came home, and Vietnam started cooking, and they didn't call me back. Because I had I think a 5 or 6 years to do in the reserve, but it was inactive reserve. I didn't have to go to meetings and stuff.
So where did you go? Where was this geographically?
Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Actually, Maryland. I was living in Maryland, but working in Washington, D.C. I worked for the city. One of the things I had picked up in the Marine Corps, I was in the field artillery, and I was eventually, as a corporal, I became charge of a small unit that was attached to the gun crews that figured out when the forward observer would radio back and say, I have a fire mission, and here are my coordinates. I would be the guy that plotted them on the map or supervised that plotting.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd figure, okay, we're here, he's here. How far is it? You do the slide rule to figure out how elevated the mortar should be, how much charge you should use, and to shoot it out there. And then also you would plot with a little grid on the map. He would say, I'm looking in this direction, and you would put the grid so that you were lined up with him. And then when you shoot a round out there, he would say, drop 200, right 200. You move the pin and recompute.
How did you learn to do that? Because that takes
In
geometry.
the Marine Corps, it was on the job training.
Okay.
And accompanying that was also some surveying
Mm-hmm.
of locating yourself on the map when you put your gun crews in there. So because of that, I got a job with the city as a highway engineering technician. And I started as a GS3 for the city. And it was the same pay scale as federal government. And I made $3,760 a year. And I thought, if I ever made $10,000 a year, boy, I'm going to be a fat cat. But
Wow.
things change.
Uh-huh.
And so I did that for 6 years, and I think I got up to a grade 7. And they paid. One shocker for me when I got out of the Marine Corps is I wasn't a veteran. I didn't have a GI Bill to go to college. I didn't have VA benefits for loans because the bill for the Korean vets had ended in 55. I went in 57 to 60, and there was no bill. Well, then, of course, they passed a bill for the Vietnam guys. And then in about 1966, I guess I had been working for the highway department about 6 years. I had gone back to night school at a local high school and brushed up on my algebra because I was doing this work in the street. And my buddy from New York had come down, just happened to be visiting me, and I said, I was thinking of taking a night school course over at Maryland University. And if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have done it. I mean, I was intimidated by the whole matriculation and going over, and I didn't know.
This was a fellow Marine.
It's the guy I'm still in touch with today, Bob Dwyer. He said, come on, he had gotten out, and he's going to Brooklyn Polytech, going to be an electrical engineer. They taught him to fix radios in the Marine Corps. So he takes me over, and I start taking night school, college level math courses. And I take about 5. I think I had a year break. I took 2, took a year off, and then took another 1 or 3. And they passed the Cold War GI Bill that said they would pay for me to go to college. It wasn't a lot, but I had 10 years as of the time they passed the bill to make use of this bill. Now, granted, it wasn't much. They didn't pay tuition. They gave you, I was a single guy. I got $100 a month. But based on what I had saved and everything, I think I can do this. I can work in the summers. And so I told them, I said, I'm going to go to college. And I figured I would major in engineering because that's what I had been doing with the highway department. And I went over to Maryland University, and lucky for me, the state of Maryland had a rule. If you graduated from a Maryland high school, they had to give you a shot at going to Maryland University. Well, my high school grades were not good because I was a goof-off. I wasn't going to college. I was going in the Marine Corps. I cut so many days of school that luckily I found a girl that wrote like my mother, and I'd go get my mother's stationery and get her to write me a note. I never got caught. I got cut in school. And so I went in to see this advisor, and I said, I want to come full time. And he's looking at my grades, and he goes, well, your grades aren't real good, but we have to give you a shot. We'd like you to go to the night school first. I said, oh, I've been to the night school. He says, what'd you take? And I said, I took 5 mathematics courses. Analytical geometry, calculus, all of that stuff. And he says, well, what kind of grades you get? So I show him my thing. I've gotten all A's and B's because my mindset was different.
Do you owe that? What do you attribute that to?
Getting older. and I'm doing it not because somebody said you had to go to high school, and plus I wanted to, get ahead.
Did the Marines impact that? Or
Most likely. Most likely. So I ended up going to the University of Maryland. I don't major in engineering because now I'm like 24, 25 years old. And I figured that to do the math, you need 144 credits in engineering to get a degree, but only 120 in math. And I said, my God, if I have to do the engineering degree, I'll be 30 years old before I get it. And that sounded like the oldest person in the world. So I majored in mathematics. I ended up graduating with honors in math. I was this dumb kid. And then I got really lucky because the computer industry was just starting to crank up big time. And the management of these places that wanted to install computers had the mistaken idea that you had to be a math major or some kind of a brainiac to program a computer. So I got a job, and I ended up doing that for the next 30 years. But I hired more, when I got into management, I hired more music majors and language majors and anybody that could think logically, that could have a set of rules, follow them, make that machine do what it's not smart, the machine's dumb. It'll do exactly what you tell it. You tell it to do it wrong, and it'll do it at lightning speed. So I ended up working for the Treasury Department I worked in a number of different places, government printing office, I actually went back to the city for a while, and then
New York.
No.
Oh, D.C.
The D.C. City government, and they started talking about separating us and our retirement money from the federal program. And I said, I don't like the way the city's being run. I'm going to get a federal job, and I applied, and I got one very rapidly and ended up at the government printing office for, 9 years, and then Treasury Department until I retired. After counting my Marine time and everything, I had like 36 years of service.
So when did you stop your Marine service? You went something to you had a reserve period, and then
but I didn't have to go to meetings. Just one day, this discharge shows up in the mail and says you've completed your 8-year obligation. Here's your honorable discharge from the Marine Corps.
What would be your best, what would you say is like, what would be the high point of during the Marine time?
The people I met,
Mm.
the other Marines.
Mm-hmm.
I met people I didn't even know existed. I met a guy who had been on the rodeo circuit and got all busted up. And he was in the Marine Corps now. And he was a bronc rider. And he went to college. And he was an all-star bronc. In other words, like we have all-star football players.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I know they.
And then guys from New York, from Philadelphia, from just everywhere.
So you picked the right branch.
Yeah. There's another guy that went to high school with me. Actually, I met him in junior high. And his father was in the Coast Guard. And he cut so many days of school, he didn't graduate with me. So he ended up, his father got stationed at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, which is where he was originally from, which is what the Coast Guard did for I think he was a warrant officer or something. So Jack graduated from school up there and then went in the Marine Corps. And I just talked to him last week. I call him we talked a couple times, 3 times a year. I went up and visited him recently and call him on his birthday, which is November 30th. And he calls me on my birthday, which is January 19th. And we lament how old we're getting.
Looking back, is there anything you would have changed?
Oh.
Because it sounded you were like a typical teenager, so if a kid now is thinking of enlisting somebody in 11th and 12th grade, high school, and that was like sort of 2 questions. Back at the time, would you have changed something? And then right now, what would you tell someone young considering military?
It's an experience, and it's not always pleasant, but I'm kind of of a mind that we owe something to this country. In Israel, for instance, everybody goes in the military. There are a lot of countries where everybody does some time. I had a guy that graduated from high school with me that belonged to a church that were conscientious objectors. Mm-hmm. He went up to Chicago and worked in a hospital for 2 years.
Through the military?
No.
Oh, but just to do service.
To do service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it may have been connected with the draft board or something, I don't know. But, his church, he was a conscientious objector. My younger brother, who told me he's like 9 years younger than I am, that he went in the Marine Corps because I did. And he was in Vietnam, and you need to interview him.
Yeah, you talked about him.
He was a gunner on a medevac helicopter, picking up wounded.
He comes up here. Yeah, that's a different. So that's your brother. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually we're half brothers, but it's about the closest family I've got.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
so it's changed. So you're still in the camaraderie that remains strong.
I can't say enough about Marines. I run into somebody out here and they've got a Marine Corps tag in their car, or I walk across the street, say Semper Fi, which is short for Semper Fidelis, which is the Marine Corps motto, always faithful. Mm-hmm. Just saw a guy the other day, he's out there with a puppy dog walking, and I walked. And it wasn't until he pulled out I saw his Marine Corps tag. So I watched for him. The next time he came in, I went over and said, "You're a Marine?" He said, "Yeah, Semper Fi." And we chatted. Turns out he owns Marietta Pizza.
Do you belong to any of the veteran organizations or the
I don't.
American Legion?
No, I don't. I've thought about, because I started a little company to keep me out of trouble. And I go to Switzerland every summer. I take people up there and go hiking in the Alps with them. And so that keeps me kind of pretty occupied. And but walking on the mountain.
Which mountain?
This is Kennesaw
There
Mountain
you go.
National
People won't
Battlefield
know
Park.
what you mean. There you go.
Most of my friends, I've only lived in Georgia for 15 years, and most of my friends are people that I've met hiking on this trail. And if somehow I can identify, or that other person can identify me as a Marine, it's always, the younger Marines go, hoorah. Okay, not to be confused with the Army, which has an H on the front. They go, hoorah. And we do oorah, but I'm old. That wasn't around when I was in, and so I'll say Semper Fi. And my friend who I walk with is an Air Force veteran, and he says to me, "How come when I see somebody else was in the Air Force, we don't start talking about where you were stationed and blah blah blah?" I said, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah.
Is it different?
It is different. Well, the Marine Corps is small.
Okay.
I've heard it's like a big fraternity. It's small compared to the Army. Marine Corps, if it has 100, I don't know, it might be 70,000 right now. I don't know what the level is, but rarely is it over 100, except maybe during World War II. Over 100,000 people. Well, the Army's got, 2 million? Or the Air Force has got all kinds of. So, and it's just, the basic training is pretty difficult, and they've changed it now. They have a thing they call a crucible. I didn't go through it, but it's like 24 hours of hell at the end of, and it's a camaraderie. I meet.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, is there anything you want to add? Because there'll be different people listening that we're going to share, but you've covered a lot of I think real normal what an 18-year-old would think of going in, but it's been good for you.
It's been good for me, and I don't want to make people mad, but it's better than living in your mama's basement. It's a job. You're going to get some benefits out of it. It's a hard job, but I mean, no matter what branch of the service you're going to, but then I used that GI Bill not only to get my bachelor's degree, but when I realized I still had time on it, I got a master's degree, most of that with that veterans money.
What did you do your master's in?
Computer science.
Great.
Or actually, they called it information technology, but basically it's and it was geared towards management, because by that time I was running a team or something, and
It sounds like you made a good thing of it. I'm going to turn off. We're going to end it here. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this information.
It's not very exciting, but
Yes, it is. I'll tell you.